dreams are practice. They are rehearsals. Dreams, nightmares. Why do we have nightmares? Because we are practicing how we're going to deal with the real situation if it comes up. When I was a kid, the nightmare that horrified me always was I was being chased by the big bad wolf, and I was running down a hallway, and I would get to the end of the hallway, and I knew if I turned on the lights, the wolf would be gone, and the light switch would not work. You know, you'd flip the switch and there'd be no lights. And so over and over again, I had this kind of a dream. And, you know, there may be sexual overtones to it as well. But to me, it was practice. It was dealing with what if. This is a collection of reference books and a collection. I started out as a collector. The stuff that I love the most about what I've collected is Victorian books. Books that were written contemporaneously to the Sherlock Holmes stories or to Dracula. Some of them were books that were clearly in the Bram Stoker library. They were books that he references in his notes. Books about Transylvania and books about the history of vampires. This is a wonderful book. This would have been tossed in your luggage. The traveler in Europe had this along and could figure out how to get from A to B. And it's referenced in both the Sherlock Holmes books and in Dracula that they used this book, and I used it to try and check some of the details. This is a number of editions of Dracula, including some of the previous annotated Draculas that were published. Here's a book about Hungary and the Carpathians. This was published in 1881, and there's no doubt that Stoker consulted the book in writing Dracula. I mean, there are so many real things in the stories that they have a great deal of, what should we say, verisimilitude. That's a wonderful big word that I think means it really feels real. I've built up a substantial library of Victorian books, travel books, encyclopedias, guidebooks, medical almanacs. But when it came to Dracula, I needed to do I had to leave my office. The most interesting to me was the Wellcome Library in London, which is a magnificent library of medical history, because a lot of Dracula is about doctoring. You've got Van Helsing and Seward, who are both doctors, and they seem to constantly be doing doctor things to people and whipping out medical instruments from their handy-dandy bag. I wanted to research some of the techniques that are mentioned, some of the instruments that are mentioned, blood transfusions that form a large part of the book. There were two other outside sources that were very important for Dracula. One is Bram Stoker's notes for the book. He wrote Dracula over a 7-year period, and he kept extensive notes about his research and his thinking about structuring the book. These notes are all at the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, and they're a treasure trove. There are lists of the books that Stoker had in his library. There are long typed out quotations from books that he used as resource material. There are plot outlines, chapter outlines, lists of characters, many of whom didn't make it into the final version. So this was fascinating to go there and study and try and puzzle through Stoker's handwriting. Subsequent to my doing that, the notes have now been published in facsimile by my friends Elizabeth Miller and Robert 18 Bizang, published by McFarland and the Rosenbach. The piece de resistance for me was the opportunity to see the manuscript of Dracula. It's owned by Paul Allen, the Microsoft founder, billionaire. And I knew that it existed because it had been put up for auction at Sotheby's in the late 90s. It had not sold, but there was a catalog description of it, and I knew that somebody had bought it privately. It didn't sell in the auction itself. So I wrote to Sotheby's and asked them to put me in touch with the owner, and I wrote a letter explaining I was a lawyer, I was a semi-respectable writer, and I wanted to look at the manuscript for scholarly purposes. And to my great shock, I was in Seattle giving a talk at the mystery bookstore there, wonderful Seattle mystery bookstore. And a woman came up to me and said, "I'm here to talk to you about Dracula." And nobody knew I was writing about Dracula except Sotheby's and my publisher. And she revealed that she was the agent for Mr. Allen, and would I sign this non-disclosure agreement, and they would allow me to come see it. So I spent 2 days with a curator, one of Mr. Allen's private curators, going through the manuscript page by page and taking notes on it. It's a fascinating document. First of all, it's not, I've been saying manuscript, it's really a typescript. Probably typed by Stoker himself, I believe. I believe that because some of his notes are typed as well, and so we knew he could type. There are extensive handwritten changes to the typescript in Stoker's hand. There are changes by an editor at his publisher. There are notes in the margin by his brother Thornley, who was a doctor who he asked to read the manuscript. There are blanks in the manuscript that have been filled in by hand. And there are cut and pasted sections of the manuscript where literally something that was typed has had a fresh piece of paper pasted over it with new material typed on top of it. When you hold those pages up to the light, you can see what's underneath. You can read the typed over stuff. I call that the suppressed material. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see the changes, to see how the book continued to grow up until the very last minute. My love of Dracula goes back to, probably 30, 40 years ago. I mean, I remember reading it in college, and it scared the heck out of me. I was extremely surprised to be as scared by the book as I was, because it seemed to me that a book that old shouldn't have any power to scare a modern 1960s college student, but it did. One question is why the book has remained in print, still read and all that, and that's a testament to the power of the book. That, I think the things that I was talking about before, the approach, the contrast of the sort of ordinariness of the people with this 400-year-old monster really makes that book work well. But more than that, it tapped into, as you say, this important figure, the vampire, which was already starting to emerge as a cultural icon in the 19th century. There had been 2 very successful books before Dracula. One, I mentioned John Polidori's The Vampire, which became a very successful series of stage plays. That was published around the same time as Frankenstein in the early 19th century, about 1815. And then in the mid-19th century, a book called Varney the Vampire that was a penny dreadful. It was a hugely successful book written by the same author as the men who wrote Sweeney Todd. And again, a very successful series of stage plays. Why? Well, the image of the vampire in those books is, first of all, a revenant, the walking undead, somebody who has conquered death, overcome being dead, and come back to having some form of life. And I think that has a tremendous interest for people, the idea that death is not the end, the idea that there is the possibility of another life, even if it's not a very pleasant life, even if it's a life that, in those books at least, is a life of creating horror among other people. In both of those cases, interestingly, the vampire is an aristocrat. And there's a certain social satirical element to that, the blood-sucking nobility preying on the rest of the people. But the vampire legends go way, way back. Vampire folklore goes back perhaps even earlier than the Greeks. And it's all wrapped up with the mysteries of death.